Today's podcast is brought to you by Patreon supporter Brooklyn Descent. If you'd like to learn how you can support the podcast through a small monthly recurring donation, just check out schooloflaughs.com/PATREON. Thanks, Brooklyn.
Welcome to the School of Laughs podcast, brought to you by schooloflaughs.com. Whether you're an aspiring comedian, a part-time pro, or a speaker who wants to become funnier, this is the podcast for you. We'll break down tools, tips, and techniques to help you get bigger, better, and more bookable. And now, here's the show.
Welcome to the podcast, first podcast of 2017. I want to thank everybody who has listened in the previous years, and if you're coming on fresh, this is the podcast where we aim, and when I say we, I always mean I aim to help you get bigger and better and more successful in the next year. The past two episodes, we covered goals for 2017, and I had over 115 requests for the Goal Trackers worksheet, so that's awesome. If you heard the podcast but never requested the worksheets, go ahead and do that now. schooloflaughs@gmail.com, and in the subject line, put Goal Tracker, and I'll shoot that right on over to you. It's free. It's my gift to you to help you outline your new year and what you want to accomplish. Next week's, or in 2 weeks, we're bi-monthly now, so every other week. On the next podcast, I'll tell you what I learned in 2016, how that's going to help me shape the new year. So that's going to be fun. I have a couple of comedian buddies on with me on that episode to kind of, give their perspective. They're at a different point in their careers, but they also have a lot of success too. So we're going to learn what they learned and share that with you. Today on the podcast, we go deep on two topics that are frequent questions from all of my listeners, maybe you as well, about how to do crowd work, how to do it better, and also about screenwriting. Had several listeners ask me, when are you going to get somebody on the show that talks about screenwriting? And we're going to talk about that. Very in-depth, formulatic, if you will. Formulatic, either way, tomato. There are formulas, there are structures that work for all stories, and it's even biblical in some ways. So you're going to want to check that out. That's the second half of the podcast. First, we talk about writing on the fly, doing crowd work, and making it work. So lots of fun in this episode. Real quickly before we jump in, I do want to thank Brooklyn Descent. She was on the podcast a while back, and now she sponsors it through Patreon. If you do that, I tell you, it's definitely worth your $7 or $5 a month, whatever you choose to help us out with. $7 and above a month, you get to join Club 52. And let me tell you, I've had more fun connecting with this group of listeners than I thought I would, even though I knew it'd be fun. We laugh a lot during our meetups. Club 52 is a 52-week email program that I set you up on to help you incrementally get bigger, better, and more bookable. But also, once a month, we do a hangout. It used to be on Google, now it's on Zoom. And we get to swap ideas. We go over things we talked about in the past couple of podcasts and see how we're applying that to our comedy business. And we also go over the last 3 or 4 emails from Club 52 and see how we can hold each other accountable for that. This is a great time to get in on that since it's the beginning of the year, and I know for sure you want to get bigger and better. For $7 a month, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. I've kind of weirded out that more people aren't jumping on this. If you think you know how to write jokes already, great. But I know we can all learn how to be bigger and better at business. And I learned things from our Club 52 gang. So once again, if you want to join in on that, this is a great time to do it. schooloflaughs.com/PATREON. I'll tell you about Nashville comedy classes after the interview with Robert G. Lee. Hey, Robert G. Lee, how's it going, buddy?
Oh, very well. I'm out here in Los Angeles, and I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Hey, I'm excited to talk to you. I've had a ton of people ask me about a few things that you know a lot about. One is audience warm-up, another is writing comedy scripts, and the other is, writing a kind of like a one-man show, and you've done a little bit of all of that. So before we get into the big accomplishments, tell me a little bit about how you first started comedy, just kind of when it was, so we can kind of get an idea of where you're at and how long you've been at it.
Well, it's a fun question. I have been doing it is now 3 decades. So it's been quite a long time. I actually started in college, and when I started it, I was with a partner, and we were known as mostly Bob and Kevin back in college. And we had a radio comedy show, but I was too afraid to do stand-up on my own. I hid behind characters, and I had to have a partner. That was the only way I had enough guts to get up on stage. And that was in college. And then when I moved out to Los Angeles, went to film school, and decided, you know what, I'm going to get back into stand-up comedy. And I did it by teaching comedy. Just like you've got your comedy class, it's a good way to just get back in the world. And so I emceed a comedy show at a club and just started working it. And then I fell into TV warm-up. So I kind of came in at bass-ackwards, shall we say. And then I started the warm-up before I started doing stand-up comedy, because I didn't have that much material. I was just emceeing at a couple clubs like Igby's and things back in the late 80s, early 90s. But the TV warm-up is just ad-libbing. It's just having fun with an audience for hours and hours and hours. And I found that I fit that niche. So that's kind of the whole story. I can give you more detail on how I got exactly into warm-up and what I had to do. But that's kind of the gist of how I got started.
That's awesome. And was it a comedian or a writer or a producer that kind of connected you to your first TV warm-up gig?
Well, it was a performer. His name was Ray Combs, and eventually he went on to be one. He was one of the guys who hosted, the game show that is
Family
escaping
Feud.
me. It is Family Feud. That was Ray. So we were partners back in Indianapolis, and we were starting off comedy together and wrote a script and a couple different shows. And when he came out here, he lied his way into warming up a TV show. He would call different shows as an agent, and he says, "I got the perfect guy for you. His name is Ray Combs." So he got a break, and he came over to my house. He said, "I've got to do the show. We got to work it." So we wrote an entire act for him, and we honed that over a couple of weeks or whatever. And then when he started doing it, we'd work on a little bit more. And when he left one show, which happened to be Golden Girls, because he had an opportunity at another show to actually perform on it, he brought me in. So my very first break was on Golden Girls, and it was because I was working with Ray Combs, and he got me in.
That's interesting. And Ray Combs, I met many years ago. He had a comedy club going in Cincinnati at one point.
Yeah, he was born somewhere around, was it Hamilton, Ohio? I think so, someplace close to Cincinnati. And he has since passed on, which is very sad. But a lot of stories there about Ray and what he became after he became famous. But we started off great friends and did not end up the same way.
Interesting. So Ray kind of got you a foot in the door, and you knew you could do comedy, you knew you could do sketches from back in college. But because I've done a couple of audience warm-up things, what gave you the confidence to go up there and just be ready to talk to people whenever they need you, forever, how long they need you? Because that's a whole different skill set.
Well, I wouldn't say I started off with that confidence. I started off with great fear and trepidation. It's very daunting to think, oh my gosh, I hope they get this scene right. I have no material left. I'm totally dry. And so that's when you pray more than anything to God that the show would hurry up and wrap up, because these things can last 5 or 6 hours sometimes. Now, the good thing on Golden Girls was that they had an audience who loved the show. That's almost easy warm-up. It's fallen off a log comedy. It's so easy because they want to be there. There's B. Arthur. There's Rue McClanahan. Oh, this is fantastic. What's hard is when you get to a show when no one knows about it and no one cares. That's when you really have to work. So to start off, you think, okay, what can I do? Now, as a stand-up comic, you prepare yourself with material. You think, okay, I've got material on family. I've got a couple jokes now on kids. I know if I go to this audience, I'll tailor my material toward them. When you're doing a TV warm-up, what you have to understand is they don't care about you. You go there totally subservient to the show. Now, after you've done it for an hour or two, the audience starts to like you. Then you can start doing your own stuff. Then you can start doing your own material. But you have to make sure that you get that audience hyped up and ready and laughing at the show. And so that is just total ad-lib material. If you start off with your material, you will die, because the audience is going, I came to see the show, not you. Who are you? You have to, in essence, trick them into liking you over a period of time. And then by the time the show is over, especially if it's 4 to 5 hours, the audience should love you. If they don't, you're in the wrong profession.
Right, no doubt. And so that first part, before you get into your material, you're pretty much asking the crowd questions, finding out who they are, and kind of ad-libbing along with them, right?
Yeah, and I still say, just like you prepare a stand-up act, you do prepare your warm-up act. Like you have a set bit. I call them prepared ad libs. So I will bring somebody down and play a game. Now, it could be, who's come the furthest. Now, Jimmy Brogan, who I think we both know and love, will go into an audience and ask people where they're from, what they're doing. I will bring them down with me. And I have found that it's always a great prepared ad lib bit to find the person who's come the furthest. And hopefully it's somebody from out of the country. So I bring a person down from Sweden, I bring a person down from Hungary, and we talk about the differences between our cultures. And so it's a prepared ad lib. I know I've done this so long that, I'm going to ask them what street they live on, and then make a joke about that. I'm going to ask them about this. I'm going to ask them how Americans are different from people in their country. So I've got my questions to ask them, and I know, okay, that will last anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how interesting they are. And if I've got two people, I'll just go back and forth. And then I know that's my bit. Okay, that bit is done. Now I'll pull in another trick from my bag of tricks. Okay, this one's going to be, I'll give something away. All right, that happens later in the night because you don't want to start too soon because people will get greedy.
Right.
But let's say I've got a book signed by Norman Lear, or I've got T-shirts, or I've got a script to give away. I'll hold off on those, but that's another prepared bit. Okay, let's say I'm going to do the dating game. I'll bring down somebody from a group and talk about their group, and then I'll find the single person, and then we'll play that whole game. And then, so every time there's a big costume change, I bring out something new. I don't do the same thing time after time after time. As the night goes on, you get to know your audience. You get to know, okay, they're lagging in energy. Now it's time for a dance contest. All right, DJ, let's have a dance contest. Boom, brings the energy right back up. So you're always thinking, what can I do to keep this audience engaged, not only with the show, but also keep their energy up? So it becomes a science, but after you've done it for such a long time, you just feel it. And that's just what happens. You know the crowd, you know the producers, and you know what kind of level of laughter they need. And so you do whatever you have to get to that point. But it is sometimes, like when I was starting off, way back on Family Matters, we would literally have gangs come to the show.
Wow.
And I mean, they weren't horrific gangs, but they were definitely gangs. And so to show that you are not afraid of them, I would always pick the leader of the gang, which is very easy to find, and bring them down. And if I could make fun of him and make him laugh, then the gang was with me for the rest of the night. And I knew I'm safe. Now, if they don't like you, then they start making little heckling noises all throughout the show, and it gets picked up in the microphone, and they have to throw out the audience laughter. So you find out just by jumping into the lion's den how to control an audience. It is definitely lion taming. That's really what it comes down to.
That's awesome. So yeah, the focus in that first part is all about engagement and getting their trust, and then as you go throughout the night, you can have more fun with it and get into your own thing. And I think that's a good lesson for the people listening that, not just as a TV warm-up, but as an MC in some of these different venues that aren't traditional comedy clubs, bringing some people up front, having never asking a question you don't know the answer to, I think is kind of what you were saying there with your prepared bits. And then once you have them and they love you, jump into your comedy. But yeah, you start off really fast with your jokes right up front. They don't know who you are or why you're there, and you can't go back to those jokes later.
That's exactly right. And something you really have to learn when I say you're subservient to the show, a lot of it comes down to ego. A lot of people cannot do TV warm-up or be a host on a show, any kind of show, because they want the show to be about them. And I've seen it with stand-up comics and just hosting a regular, well, we've seen it at, the CCA conference, people who go up and want to be a host of let's say amateur night or something, or a showcase, and they just want it to be about them, and they do their material. It's like that dies. So you really have to know it's not about you. And if you cannot be subservient to the show in a TV warm-up, you will not last very long. And those are the people that probably have bigger careers than I do now. I know they do, but they couldn't make it. And I've been doing it for 30 years purely because I know, one, I'm funny, but two, I know where my bread is buttered, and I know that it's about them, not about me. It's a little bit of Charlotte's Web. The pig is great, and that's your job.
Right. No, that's good stuff. And obviously from doing that warm-up, you said you kind of did the warm-up before you had your stand-up act together. Were you finding bits and pieces that worked that you took to the comedy club stage and other places after the warm-up started evolving?
Well, Yes and no. What I've taken to my warm-up, from my warm-up to my stand-up, is the ability to ad-lib. I have found that people love ad-libs. That's why it works for a lot of performers, but it's really difficult. People, they can smell prepared material. But once you dive off into the audience and start asking about their jobs or where they live or what they do or how many kids they have, they know, wait a minute, you're making this up on the spot. And the energy goes right up. Man, do they love it. If you can get on a good roll and find somebody that you can play with and they know you're making it up on the spot, audiences immediately love you. So I have trained myself over 30 years doing warm-up on how to ad-lib, and audiences don't scare me anymore. So it's fun because then you weave in your material, and as you're ad-libbing and finding a subject matter, your brain is also going, what material do I have to match this? So, if I'm talking to a lady about her job and I've got material, if she's a teacher, well, I've got prepared material about being a kid in a class or teachers or my kids in school. So it's a great segue over into prepared material. And now when you run out of that, you go back in the audience and start ad-libbing again. So what happened is, the two careers really coincided that I would be able to use my prepared material. I would bring it into the warm-up after I'd been doing the show for an hour or two, and then the ad-libbing ability from the warm-up I took over to my stand-up, and it helped my shows tremendously, especially when you do something more than a half hour. If you're only doing 10 minutes, you don't have time to ad-lib. You've got to do your prepared material. But when you're doing a regular show of, let's say, 45 minutes, man, you better ad-lib something in there, or the audience is going to get less and less interested because they just know, well, this is by rote. You've got to make it special for me. Audiences are selfish. They want to know, what is it about me that you love? Let's talk about me. And every audience has that, junior high kids and high school kids especially. But generally, audiences love to hear something new and fresh. So that's my answer to your question. Both sides help each other.
Yeah, it's great, and it worked out well for you. And then at some point, you got a chance to perform on a couple of these shows that you were warming up, correct?
Yes, they threw me a bone. I get approximately 30 cents a year from old repeats of Hogan Family in Australia. Yeah, I was always waiter number 5 or, the delivery guy. It was always made, and they were very nice. I can't complain. I was the MC one time on Wings, and they brought me back a couple times on Perfect Strangers as the delivery guy. But it's always something where you just run down, do one scene and run back up, because the job they want you to do is TV warm-up. They don't really want you to be on screen. They like you, and after you've done a show for a while, I would put it in my contract that I get to be on the show at least once. So yeah, I was on Perfect Strangers at least 3 or 4 times because I did that show for a long time. Wings once, Family Matters, Hogan Family, Married with Children. Early on, I really wanted to be an actor. I was moving that way. Then I realized this is stupid. I don't want to be an actor, and I'd much rather direct and write and be behind the scenes. So you kind of find out where your skill set lies. But yeah, it was very fun, and those things are really what I call my mullet years. That's when the hair was really long in the back. And that was my sitcom years. Yeah.
That's great. And you just touched on something super important there that I think some of the newer comedians out there should hear, and that actually I've had in a couple of conversations recently, is it takes you a while to figure out what your skill set is, and everybody that starts out as aspiring to be a stand-up, that might just be the vehicle that gets you to be a writer or to be a producer or to be something that's ancillary, something that's, what's the word, ancillary?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I can't pronounce it either, so I will say, yes, you are correct.
Yeah, something that goes along with stand-up.
I think it's ancillary, but yes, go ahead.
Something that's ancillary, but not exactly what you started off to do. And then I think a lot of people, when they get to that point, they just quit everything because they really had that dream of being a stand-up or had the dream of being an actor. But there's so many roles that are important to make all those things happen, and you found your skill set, and you liked writing as much as performing, and you started to write some things recently, a full-blown movie, which we'll talk about in a second. But back in those warm-up days, did you write some sitcom episodes or mess around with a little bit of that?
I did, and I'll get to that. Let me table that just for a second and agree with what you're saying. Judd Apatow being the best example of what you're talking about. He was a stand-up comic, and he was in all the clubs I was in early on, and he realized as he was going up the ladder, he was never going to be the headliner. But he was good friends with a lot of people who are headliners, and he could write material for them. And so he started writing for Gary Shandling and a lot of different comics, and then he moved into movies. He was smart enough to know where his skill set was. And I love the fact that you may not agree with his movies or like what he does. He ad-libs more in his movies than I like more structure. So we're different in that. He's also 10 times more successful than I am. So perhaps his method is right. But he was a guy who found, you know what, I'm not good here, but I'm good there. And I know a lot of stand-ups who moved on to become good directors and good writers and moved into writing for sitcoms or sometimes performing, but most of them usually went behind the scenes. Now, as far as what I did early on, I really had a desire to write on those sitcoms. And that was an interesting experience because I did write on some of them, and that was the other part of my contract. When I said, I don't really want to be an actor, but I'd much rather be in the room. I got to be in the writer's room for shows like Step by Step and Getting By and Wings, and a couple. Jenny McCarthy had a short show that came out, so I would do the warm up on show day, but I would go in during the week 1 or 2 days and work on the show, and that really was a great thrill, and I learned so much. But unfortunately, I also learned, you know what, Bob, you don't really fit in this area. And that was quite an eye-opening thing for me. When you're a stand-up, you know if you're working. It's like, you know what, I know I'm funny. I know I can do it. But then when you're in a room of a different kind of personality, I guess I should put it, that you may or may not fit. And I would say this is the overarching idea of what Hollywood is and was, is that a show like Wings, I loved it. I loved the people, but the people who wrote on it, they won Emmys, and there was a bit of a snobbish clique going on there. So the young writers really had a hard time breaking in. And I got a couple jokes in, and they would go, "Look at that, Robert G. Lee got a joke in the show." And so those were proud moments. But it was one of those things where I'm a faith-based performer, and sometimes they would openly mock me. It was like, or I'd be out of the room and I'd hear them talking about, let's give this to the Christian, see what he comes up with. Some of them respected me, a lot of them didn't, and I think in my early on career, it was difficult. It really was hard. So it's like I came to the point. It's like, boy, I came in here to write sitcoms. I don't think this is where I fit, and that's when I moving toward, I started writing for VeggieTales. Okay, I fit there. And that's when I started moving into my own scripts and trying to make independent movies, because I knew at least then I would know if I thought I was funny or if it worked, and I wouldn't have a room people going, "Nah, we don't like that." So some of the shows were just a great experience. Some of them it was just torture for 8 hours. And it's almost like you're in corporate America, because each room, and I say room for sitcom, has a different personality. One personality would be you tell a joke and everybody would laugh, but until the executive producer repeated it, it wouldn't get in the show. And that's when you learn, if I make him laugh and he repeats it, he thinks it's his joke, and then it gets in the show. So there's that style. There's another style of condescension, of everything is that everybody in the room pretty much hates everyone alive. And if you come in with condescension and hate in your heart, then you're going to work on the show. So I learned a lot of lessons, but eventually figured out this is not where I fit either. So again, it was going back to, what is your skill set? What can you do? And where can you fit? And also, how will they pay you? What will they pay you to do? And it's just, for me, unfortunately, for a long time, it was TV warm-up.
Gotcha. And then you have eventually not only written your new movie, but you've done, is it 8 one-hour comedy shows, programs, specials, whatever you like to call them? Is it?
Sure, let's go for that. Yeah, let's.
Is it 8?
Yes, I have done 8, so over a long period of time, and just did my most recent one last year. And each stand-up special is about an hour long. So I did one with video slides behind me. It's called Picture This, with my whole family from start to finish, and that. You're always looking for universalisms. How can I relate to the audience? We did another one called A to Z, where every topic was, I started at A and at anatomy and went all the way through Z for Z end, and I had a different subject for every single letter. And some of them with varying degrees of success. Some were very funny, and some were like, well, you better work on Q a little bit more. But that was a fun. So I tried to find a theme for a lot of these videos, because it's just easier to write material for me if I have a theme. But the last one's called Weisenheimer, and I'm working on my next one. So it's I don't do one every single year. That's impossible. But over 30 years, I have done 8. And what's great is it's ammunition as a comic. You get up in front of an audience and you never know what they're going to like or not like. But the more material you have, it's like, okay, you guys don't want to do material on X, Y, and Z. Well, how about this? And then you eventually, hopefully, will find something that the people can relate to. But most of my material relates and revolves around family and observations and faith. And those are really where I go. I'm not a political comedian at all. I don't do any jokes along that line, because Jay Leno used to say, if you do political humor, at any one given time, half the audience hates you and half the audience loves you. And so why would you want to do material like that? So I keep it pretty much family oriented.
Gotcha. Now, I'm of the same mind that, I'd rather entertain everybody as opposed to just half. And for the same reason, I try to keep my shows super clean, because everybody can laugh at clean. And if you're dirty, maybe half the people laugh twice as hard and you think you're doing a great job, but really you're only entertaining 50%. That's just my approach too. But keeping it straight down the middle politically is a smart thing. And I think too, right now, people are exhausted with political humor.
Exactly.
Right
now, if you come up and just do a regular routine, people are relieved. It's like, oh, thank you. I didn't know we could laugh anymore. I thought 2016 was going to kill us all. Oh, so I don't bring up fear. I don't bring up politics. No, don't even go there. Yeah. Because in the TV warm up, I might throw out one or two jokes, but in a regular show, nope. Don't want to make people uncomfortable. Don't want to do it.
There you go. It's time to make America laugh again.
I agree.
Well, let's talk about this movie that you wrote, produced, everything around it, the Can I Get a Witness Protection. Let's go back. I'm going to ask you about the structure in a second, but how long ago was the seed planted for the movie, and roughly how long did it take from that to when you finally had it done?
Great question, and one for anyone, a good question for anyone who's thinking of doing this. It was a 4-year journey. I did not think it was going to be a 4-year journey. I did not plan on it. I don't know if I would have gotten into it had I known it was going to take this long. We literally just got distribution this week.
Oh, great.
And so it'll be out next June. It'll take about 6 months to get the cover and do the publicity and all that kind of stuff. But it started off as a very simple, hey, we've got a barn, let's put on a show. It was a church was going broke. They needed to have Hollywood types come in and rent their church out during the week because their congregation was shrinking and they couldn't afford to pay the mortgage. So we said, sure, we'll go in there. I went around the church, found out everything about it. It was kind of dilapidated, which worked perfectly for my story. So I said, what if there was a plot just like Some Like It Hot or Sister Act, where someone's in witness protection and they put him in a church? Okay, what would happen? So that's where it started, and I put him in this church. Every scene but one was shot in the church. If there's a police scene, we put them in a corner, hang a light, and make it look like it's an interrogation room. It's a corner of the church. If there's a scene where a guy's in a cabin in Montana, we put a green screen outside a window and put mountains out there, pan the camera, and now he's in a cabin in Montana. So we used every corner of this church to make it look like different scenes. But for the most part, this guy gets thrown in a church, his very first day on the job. The head pastor dies and he has to take over. So that's pretty much the plot. And there's danger from outside of the drug ring finding him. And of course, danger on the inside as a guy who knows nothing about religion has to run a congregation, and especially one woman who, that very tight religious type who thinks the church is her church. And so it's his faith journey as he goes through it. So it's a comedy. It's a faith-based comedy. It's a faith-based screwball comedy. But that started with just a simple idea. Hey, we can do it. Like Judd Apatow, he works with an ensemble. I have some of the funniest people that I think are working in Hollywood today because I was working as a church drama director for many years as a part-time job at my church. And from that, we really developed shorthand on how to work with people. And so I wrote the parts in the movie for them. So if nothing else, I will say the movie does have some great ensemble comedy actors. And that is where I get my greatest satisfaction of seeing my people, my friends, do what I love for them to do. I say, this lady's a great singer. This guy's a great physical comedian. This guy is really good at sarcasm. So I wrote the parts for them. And so we rehearsed beforehand, shot the movie in 16 days, very low budget, under $200,000, raised the money from Kickstarter, from Indiegogo, and from people in our church that said, we love what you're doing in our church. We want to see you do that on a big scale. And so this is what I've wanted to do for years and years. And as part of that, the lack of success in sitcoms, because there are too many chefs in the kitchen, as it were. And I said, you know what? Every year, I mean, just to backtrack a little bit, Christian music got to be as good as secular music with Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith, early on in the 80s, 70s and 80s and 90s. And then VeggieTales started doing video, but Christian movies really didn't come into the fore until equipment got cheap enough that everybody could do it. And the Kendrick brothers started off with theirs, Facing the Giants, made for $100,000, and look where they've gone. And so now everybody's jumping on that bandwagon, and it's because, one, the market's there, but two, equipment is finally cheap enough that we can make a movie that looks like a feature with such cheap equipment. So you really can make a movie for a low price. Anyway, made the movie, and then it was literally 3.5 years of post-production. It's like, how can you make a movie in 16 days and then take so long to have it finished? Well, everybody's working on favors. My editor was working on Supernatural, so she could only edit whenever she's not working full-time. My composer was working on Amazing Race and different shows. He could only compose whenever he's not working full-time. My special effects guy, he was working for Disney, doing things in Europe and over in Asia. He could only do the special effects when he wasn't working full-time. And some of these guys are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. So when you're independent, you're asking for favors, and all you can do is wait and go, okay, you finish it whenever you want. I mean, the opening title sequence took 9 months.
Oh, wow.
I was like, how long can this possibly go? But it was animated, and they could only do a little bit at a time. So you just have to be really, really patient. So then it was finally wrapped up. And then we started taking it out to distributors. We put it in a film festival, and it won Best Feature Comedy, and that was great. And so now, just this last week, we got a yes from a distributor, and so he's out of Nashville, faith-based distributor called Jack's Distribution, and he did God's Not Dead 1 and 2. He sold that into different stores. It'll go directly to video. It won't be in the theaters. It'll be, because it's such a small film, but Netflix or PureFlix, those kind of things, will get it on the video on demand and all that kind of stuff. So now comes the next part of life that I know nothing about, and that's promoting a movie. But that's going to be my job for the next 6 months.
That's awesome, and I'll probably circle back in 6 or 8 months and ask you and pick your brain about how that promotion tour went and what you learned along that. But let's dig in this movie a little bit more. You said you shot it in 16 days, cost a little under $200,000, and then it took this 3.5 years for post production. Did the cost go up in that 3.5 years, or was the $200,000 able to cover the post production through favors and things?
Well, the cost was all. It's a surprise. We did have to go back to Indiegogo to raise another $10,000 or so to cover a lot of it, because yes, the post production was quite an eye opening exercise. It's like, if you're going to do a good sound mix and have a good engineer and do all the Foley, that goes up to $25,000. Well, that was not in the original budget, and then so really the cost the God-saving grace of saving us to the last minute came when we were shooting the film, because SAG, these are things you learn as an independent filmmaker. Okay, you have to hire SAG actors. You hire SAG actors because they're really good. If you hire amateurs, your movie's going to look like it's made by amateurs. But SAG, you have to put all of the money for the salaries for your actors in escrow before the movie starts, because SAG doesn't trust you because they've had a lot of experience. So let's say it's $30,000. Well, my whole budget at that time was $150, and now I had to take $30,000 that I could not use to pay anybody else. Couldn't pay the crew, couldn't do anything, and had to put it aside in escrow. So now we're strapped. I don't have the money to finish the film. I needed that $30,000 to finish all the shooting. So we had to have loans and friends come in and help us out, and Kickstarter, just to get through the filming. Then when the filming was done and we proved to SAG that we paid all the actors, they gave us that $30,000 back that was in escrow, and we used that for post-production. So really, SAG forced us to find money, and they helped pay for our post. But these are things you should know going into filmmaking, but nobody does know. At least when, like me, and you're a neophyte, it's like, well, let's just make a movie. No, there's a lot to it, working with unions and so SAG was one thing. The DGA and the WGA, Directors Guild and Writers Guild, were the very same thing, but I was the member of those, so I got a total of $0. I deferred all the money, so it was just a project, labor of love. So it is not a money-making operation. It is purely because you want to do it and have a passion to do it, which is my next point for filmmakers. Don't do it unless you really love the project. Don't think that you're going to become famous and that it's going to be your ticket to Hollywood. Make sure you love this thing because you could live with it for a long, long time.
No doubt about that. And in case anybody didn't know, the SAG is Screen Actors Guild, so actors that have been part of that and are protected by that group. So very cool. Well, let's dig into what I find the most interesting as a comedian and as a writer is the structure of a movie, at least the way you approach this one. When I watch movies, you can kind of tell the beats a little bit. When you watch TV shows, you kind of know by that 35-minute mark there's going to be the major twist, and there's certain plot lines that unravel and get tied back up at the end. But for a movie like this, what approach did you take? And can you share some of that for the people that are listening that would like to write a movie, or even if it applies to stand-up or any kind of long form?
Yes, and there's just so much to say about it. And I went to film school many, many years ago at the American Film Institute as a screenwriting fellow. And so that is a love I've always had. And they tried to cram structure down our throat, but it really didn't become clear until after I'd been doing it for many, many years and learned a thing from a good friend of mine, a professor named Sean Gaffney, called the theology of story, which I'll talk about. If you're talking about a movie, a stand-up act, a play, a one-man act, whatever it is, they all follow the very same structure, which sounds very strange, but that's what the truth is. Now, Billy Wilder puts it like this. He says, Act 1, send your hero up a tree. Act 2, set the tree on fire. Act 3, get your hero out of the tree. So that's the most simplified way anybody could talk about story. When I talk about theology of story, what that really means is, and I'm a faith-based performer, and so everything to me comes from this. Joseph Campbell is a man who in the 40s wrote about the hero myth, and he traveled the world and he found all these different cultures and found that they all tell stories the same way, that they all have this myth, this way of story working. And so he came to the conclusion that, well, there is no God because we all have, no matter what culture we're in, we have the very same story. Well, I look at it from the other perspective as, well, the fact that every culture has the very same hero myth proves that we do have a God and that he has written his story on our hearts. And if the story we're watching does not reflect the story in our hearts, it doesn't work. So I know that may be a little too highfalutin and too much theory here, but it does really work that every single story reflects exactly what is in the Bible. And I would say it's actually irrefutable. You really can't come up with a story that anytime you see a story and it doesn't quite work, I put it to you that it doesn't follow the classic structure. Now, classic structure is Act 1, you have the beginning, you tell the audience what normal is, and the story makes a promise of a better tomorrow. Think of Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. What does she have? She dreams of a better life outside of Kansas. Sheriff Brody from Jaws starts his new job, but danger is lurking in the water of the dangerous town. You have two misbehaved kids from Mary Poppins who need a nanny. Everybody knows what a beginning of a story is. Mm-hmm. That's classic structure. And then you have a thing called inciting incident. And that is where something enters into it. It's the shark enters into Jaws. Mary Poppins floats down from the sky. This is the inciting incident that now things are going to start. Luke Skywalker, what happens? He gets a little robot and he finds the video of Princess Leia. That's the inciting incident in the first act. Now you're off on an adventure. What's going to happen? The first act goes along till you get Act 2. Act 2 is the journey to something. Frodo, well, you know what that is. He's got the ring, and they decide who's going to take the ring to Mordor, and it's Frodo. You get to do it. So now we're on Act 2. That's the middle. This is the heroes made the discovery of some sort, and the story brings in plot points, action points, turning points. The tornado drops Dorothy in Oz, and now she's on the journey. She has to get to Oz to see the wizard to get back home. And along the way, we know as an audience, she's going to learn some lessons. We know that this is going to be something that they start off one way, they have to change by the end of the film, or we're not going to like it. Mary Poppins leads these children on many, many journeys, but the whole time we're also learning about the Father and what he's doing, because it's really his story. And Act 3 is the end. The audience needs to have a satisfying resolution. You've got, Sheriff Brody blows up the shark. Mary Poppins, the father loses the job, but he realizes his children are more important, so then he gets his job back. Act 3 is always that, that summation of everything, and then you end up at a place where we go, great, we're happy about it. So I'm going to give you 5 beats. Number 1, balance. Establish what's normal. Number 2, unbalance. Something happens to upset the normal world. Number 3, quest. The hero does something to restore the balance of what he thinks would be normal. You can think of 1,000 hero stories of this quest. Mm-hmm. Number 4 is the crisis. This is so important. Something happens to prevent the plan from working. This is the low point of the film. Then you have the climax and a new balance, where some sort of new balance is restored. The empire is defeated. It goes on and on. So these are that's the basic structure. And we've all heard this 1,000 times. But then you think about, well, how does this go with the theology of story? What does that mean? Well, think of God's story as one big story. The opening is Act 1, and that's paradise. You always start off in paradise, and that's pretty easy. Garden of Eden. Every single movie has to start in paradise, and it has to end in a new and different paradise, which when you look at the Bible as one story, that's what it ends up as. In heaven, remember, the tree of life is taken out of the Garden of Eden, but it's put at the very end in the new heaven. So, we have this story here. So what is the story? You have the balance that we've had in every single story. It's the Garden of Eden. What's the inciting incident? I'll ask you, Rick, what is the inciting incident of the Bible?
Well, this snake came along.
You got it. The snake comes along, upsets the balance. The cart is upset. And now, whether you believe it's metaphorical or real, sin entered the world, entropy entered in, and now God has to figure out a way to get us back. It is his story. It is him seeking us. So the big event, kicked out of the garden. Man, you go work the crops. Woman, you're going to be in pain and childbirth. You're going to have a hard time from this point on. But God still is seeking man. And so he makes a deal with Abraham, saying, Abraham, I'm going to be your God. And throughout the Old Testament, he's showing a system of sacrifices. Again, going too theological here, but it's all God seeking man and showing us that we cannot do it on our own. So that's the journey. That's the journey that God is going through. That's his quest. That's the Old Testament. God is trying to find ways to be known and have his people know us. And then you get to a thing called the midpoint pinch. Every single story has it. This is where the hero ups the ante and says, you know what? It's up to me. No one can do this but me. And so this happens time and time again. And the midpoint pinch in the Bible is the nativity story. This is where God breaks through human history. And for the first time in history, God became known to man. It was always ethereal. We never knew him before. And the nativity is what achieves that. Now, another thing that always happens in every single movie is called the temptation. And that, of course, is Christ in the desert with the temptation. But there's always a point, and think of It's a Wonderful Life. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Stewart gets a job offer from Mr. Potter. It's that point when the hero can say, you know what, it's not worth it, I'm going to walk away. And the hero always goes, well, no, doggone it, no, I'm not like everyone else, And so Jimmy just says no to Mr. Potter, and we go, yeah, be your own man. Right. So they go off. And now the hero's on the last part of the journey where we know, oh no, this is not going well. Well, in the Bible, and this is what they even taught us in film school. I'll never forget the day when they said, what is the crisis of the Bible? It is where everything falls apart and nothing works. And we kind of looked around and said, you're really talking about the Bible? You go, yeah, what is the crisis of the Bible? And we said, well, it's the cross. The cross is when the crucifixion happens, when it all goes awry. Every single story has to have a death or a metaphorical death to push the hero to the final climax. And after the cross happens, everyone's depressed, and you have that scene where everyone thinks it's over. There's no way we can win. And then the hero Rocky finds the way. I'm going to get up from the mat. I'm going to go the distance. Whatever it is, They get over the pain, and they have the climax. And the climax is always that big, big fight where the hero wins or loses. I mean, sometimes the hero loses. Those are the tragedies. But after they win, like Jesus is resurrected, then you have the new balance, otherwise known as the denouement, and in heaven it's the New Jerusalem. And then everything is like it was supposed to be at the beginning before all this happened. So in Star Wars, it's the Rebel Alliance has won and blown up the Death Star, and we have the victory parade, and Leia hangs trophies around their neck. Now, it's a short-term victory, but it's a victory nonetheless. So you find these beats in literally every single successful story. And if it's not there, somehow it doesn't feel right. If a character doesn't have enough of a change, if they don't have a good resolution, you go, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. And early screenwriters, young neophytes, don't understand what these beats are. Whether they think it's theology of story or not, it has to have these beats. And if it doesn't, you will have a failed screenplay.
That is incredibly deep, man. I'm taking notes and looking at it, and God, there's a lot there. You gave us great examples from the Bible and from other movies. Could you just walk us through your movie with those 5 beats and just give us a synopsis of what goes on for your main character?
Well, sure. If you talk about Normal is a guy at home, and our hero he owns a trucking firm. And that's normal. And he and his wife are not getting along. She owns a decorating firm.
And that's really normal.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. So they're in San Diego. They're a high. I have to make them fairly high society because I want a contrast for where they're going to go. So what you have is the balance. The balance is this is their life, and they're going to be happy even though they're not happy. Their marriage is falling apart. Excuse me. But our hero owns a trucking firm, and it so happens that a drug lord has been renting his trucks, and unbeknownst to him, I got this from an article in the LA Times, they're using these trucks and hiding money in the lining and putting in false fronts and false backs and under the carriage and in the engine, and drug firms are going back and forth from Colombia and transporting money, and then they launder it and they transport drugs. Well, he witnesses a gangland murder, and so now you have an inciting incident where the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, now takes him out of his world and has to hide them. And so this couple that isn't getting along that well now is forced to leave. They don't want to leave, but they have to. They're yanked out of their life. Inciting incident has happened, and now they're kicked out of the garden, as it were, and they're put into a church. And then the next day they find out that the church has clothing giveaways, and the place where they hung all their clothes, the next day people are going through them and taking them. All the homeless people have taken all their clothes. So this is a rich couple that has no bedroom, no clothes, and now they're at a place where they don't want to be, but they're in danger for their lives. So now that's the ripped out of the garden. Now they start the quest. Well, what do we do? Excuse me. How does this church work? Neither one of them is religious, so they have to fake their way through it. Well, the start of the next journey where they really go through is that the head pastor has a heart attack and dies, as I said. Now that pushes them to, he is now the head pastor. So now here's the guy, his quest, as it were, is to, he's got to give sermons, and he gives the worst sermons ever because he knows nothing about the Bible, so he's got to cram everything in. His midpoint pinch comes when he realizes he is a total hypocrite. He has no knowledge of the Bible, the thing is, he's not doing it on purpose. He just is it's a hypocrite by being hypocritical by proxy. He's been forced into the situation by the Drug Enforcement Agency, and they can't leave because they don't have the money. It's all locked up in a safe that they don't have the combination to. So our hero has a conversion moment because he reads so much about what the Bible is all about, from Josh McDowell's book of Evidence That Demands a Verdict to C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity. It slowly sinks in, and he realizes, wait a minute, to not be a hypocrite, all I have to do is believe what I'm talking about. And so he has that conversion moment, and that is that moment, as I said, the midpoint pinch, where it is the hero says, I'm going to double down. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. I'm the only one that can do it. So that's what the conversion moment's about. The temptation is now you can walk away if you want to. The DEA says, I've got a new place that we can take you. We can get you out of this church. And he says, no, I want to see how this plays out. I want to stay here. So now he's invested. He actually is excited about the adventure of Christianity. And he moves on to lead this church, and the church starts growing, and people start flocking to the church. What was empty is now alive. But there, of course, is the person who says, no, you're not running the church the way I want it run. I want a traditional service. I don't want us to go out and help the poor. I want to have a 3-point sermon and an offering. And so then she discovers he never went to school for theology. He has no degree, and he is a fraud. And so she, at the crisis, it's over, it's done. The church that he loves now is going to be taken away from him. All is lost. And she has a congregational meeting to kick him out. And in front of the whole meeting, he has to admit that he is a fraud. He can't tell them why. And so we as the audience are rooting for him, saying, oh, please, come on, you got to tell her. But he can't do it. And at that moment, that's the crisis. All is lost. Everything is painful. That now the criminal who, at the very beginning, murdered, he saw the gangland murder, discovers where he is because there was a news report earlier showing how popular this church is. He tried to run away, but they got his picture on the screen. And so now in the church, after everything is gone and the crisis happens, in comes the murderer, and now it even gets worse. And so what's going to happen? How does the climax come? Well, you'll have to watch the movie. But then, of course, the hero always has to win, and we have to have a new balance set where everything turns out where this is where he's supposed to be all along. So the marriage works out, the church works out, the criminal is taken care of, and then you have a clean, neat story.
That is incredible. So I'm trying to think if I was going to apply this to, say, a story on my own, or even your stand-up set. So like this could be an example of those 5 phases. Maybe the comic starts out, he's married, everything is going pretty well, kind of got used to it, been married for 5 or 6 years. And then the unbalance happens when they're going to have kids. There's a pregnancy, and now he's switching gears a little bit. The journey happens where he's trying to figure out if he can be a parent or not, and maybe even the pinch comes in to where the wife's going to leave him because he's not being a good parent, and then he seeks counseling and things to change himself, and maybe even learns a lesson from the kid. And then new balance of normal is restored. He's a good dad. And then as the movie's fading out, you hear maybe the wife say, hey, I think I'm going to have another baby, and it all restarts. Something like that?
I would say it's perfect, except that middle point is the midpoint pinch has to be where he decides, I'm going to change, I'm going to counseling, and then the crisis happens when the wife says, it's not enough, I'm leaving. So the crisis has to be the ultimate low point, and then he learns lessons, changes, becomes what she wanted to be all along, and then they restore their marriage, and he makes a grand romantic gesture to her, and then she gives him that one last shot that she was waiting for. Now you become the man I always wanted you to be, and now, exactly right. And by the way, I'm going to have another baby. Yeah, but you're right. A good stand-up act, if it's a one-act play, which is really what any stand-up act is, we want to see some kind of emotion, which is why Shonda Pierce is so popular. I mean, she'll talk for 3 hours, but man, she lays out the emotion, and those ladies relate. And so the acts that you walk away from without something that shows who the character is will not be as strong as those shows that have something real from the character, from the performer. Now, it doesn't have to have classic structure. It'll be better with a one-act play if it is, but please remember as you do it, all these things, we want to see a character change. That's why you see material of stand-up comics going, men are stupid? Yeah, I'm stupid. I'm an idiot. Self-deprecating humor really works because we don't want to think that you're cocky, that you have it all together. And by the end of your act, you want to point out that, things are good. I still got a long way to go, but, I've realized X, Y, and Z. I know that I love my wife and I love my kids, which, by the way, is another piece of advice for all stand-up comics. Do not insult your wife. Talking about politics will alienate half the audience. If you even hint that you don't love your wife, you will alienate half the audience. Those women will hate you. It always has to be, you love her, she's better than you married up, and you are learning how to be an intelligent man because you're such an idiot. Right. That will work. It may seem like you're placating, but that's the only thing that will work in front of audiences.
No, that's great stuff. And, at the very least, if a comic doesn't want to rewrite their whole act, you can restructure some of the bits and put them in the places along these 5 points to where they'll work better. I once saw a comic, he went up, and he was like the angriest guy for 10 minutes. He was just screaming. And then like at the 11th minute mark, he told us he just got divorced like a day earlier. Well, you get everything out of order there.
Yeah, what you just brought up is called pet the dog. If the character comes out, the stand-up comic, and tells the audience that he just got divorced, we have immediate sympathy for him. And then the rest is palpable because we know from where he comes. It's called pet the dog because you always have to have your lead character do something kind. That's when someone, throws some bread in front of squirrels or helps their next door neighbor with a flat tire. It's like, oh, he must be a good guy. We have to like him somehow, or we will not, or it will be the whole movie's over. And it's like, well, yeah, you just got redeemed, but I thought you were an asshat the whole time. So no, I don't like you. Exactly what you're talking about. If you just restructure things, you can make your whole act work instead of alienating everybody who's watching you. Perfect.
Man, this was very good, man. This was almost like I went to a comedy college today and got a nice class in here. If people want to find you, I know you're on Twitter at ROBTGLee. You've got robertglee.com. They can also go to www.saltworks-studios.com to find out about some of the productions and how they can help fund some of that stuff. Anything else you think I should let these folks know about you before I let you go?
No, I appreciate. I know I crammed way too much in a short period of time, and so it was like getting a tsunami of information as you're sitting there at your desk. But I appreciate the time you gave me, and I hope that that a lot of this will at least make people think about writing their acts a little bit differently, or give them some place to go off and to write new material. For me, I love looking at other people's material. Like Dustin Nickerson has written a sitcom pilot, so he sent that over to me, and a couple different people have done that. So it's always fun to read scripts because every time you do, you learn something. You go, oh, that's where this is weak. Oh, that's how we can improve it. That creative juices part of it is what turns me on. I love that. So I thank you for letting me just kind of spout my various theories here.
No, it's great, and it was a lot, but the great thing about the podcast, people can pause, come back to it, and come back to it when they're further in the process and hear it from a new, fresh set of ears every single time. So I super appreciate you today, Robert G. Lee. Enjoy the rest of your day there in sunny California, and I'm sure we'll circle back in 6 or 8 months and find out how all the movie promoting went.
Well, that would be great. Best of luck to you. I look forward to seeing you, if nothing else, this next June.
You got it. Thanks, buddy.
You betcha. Bye.
Boom, I told you he was going to deliver the goods. Robert G. Lee breaking it down. I mean, I'm going to listen to this one again and take some extra notes. I did take some show notes for you there at schooloflaughs.com. Hit the podcast tab and scroll down to this episode. Man, Robert really brought it there. Thank you so much, Robert. Can't wait to see how your movie does and hope you get it out there and support it and get it distributed the best you possibly can. Oh, man. If you're in the Nashville area and you want to take a live comedy class or maybe even an improvisational comedy class or, dare I say, a performance class, all of those are coming up here in the first quarter of the year. Let me tell you the dates on each of those right now so you know about it, and you can find out more information by just shooting me an email, schooloflaughs@gmail.com. I have the live stand-up comedy writing class. That's Wednesdays, February 1, 8, and 15 from 6 to 8 p.m., that's a $200 class, and you have lifetime membership to come back and take that class any point down the road. We also have a pair of classes happening on the same nights, just back-to-back, so this is a great chance if you want to work on your performance skills. A 6 to 8 p.m. class, performance comedy class, where you'll get up and perform a set, get some critiques from me and from the other students, and you get to go around a couple times, work on that set, and get ready for a graduation show here at Zanies if you want to take part in that. Or if you just want to tune up your set and you've taken that class again, you can jump in on that. That's March 6, 13, and 27 from 6 to 8 p.m. The improv class, Improv Level 1 Games, that's also on March 6, 13, and 27. We're going to kick that off at 8 o'clock and roll through 9:30, 9:45 on those nights. You want to definitely jump in on that. That class I only offer once or twice a year. It's tons of fun. You learn how to think on your feet and trust your gut and engage with your audience in a whole different level by learning to do some improv. And every game I teach in that is applicable to your stand-up, and we break down that after each class so you can see how to apply that. All that stuff's happening in the next couple of months. In April, we'll have the Business of Comedy Seminar. That's April 1st, April Fool's Day. What a perfect day. That's a Saturday from 1 to 4 p.m. Right here in Hermitage outside of Nashville, Tennessee. If you are a Patreon sponsor, don't forget, at the $7 level month or more, you get the Hangout, and that's happening this Saturday from 1 to 2 p.m. If you haven't downloaded the Zoom app, do that now. You go to zoom.us, and I'll be checking in with you Thursday or Friday to make sure you're prepared for that Hangout on Saturday. Thanks a lot, everybody, for checking out the podcast. Check out schooloflaughs.com for more information, and I will talk to you next week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay funny.
Thanks for listening to the School of Laughs podcast. If you'd like to hear more School of Laughs podcasts, you can find them on iTunes and Stitcher.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. For information on upcoming live and online classes, visit schooloflaughs.com. Until next time, stay tuned, stay focused, and stay funny.